History remembers kings through wars, reforms, and monuments, but some reigns are remembered through silence. During the rule of Yeonsangun, the palace did not echo with celebration. It echoed with waiting. Every evening, as the sun disappeared behind the palace walls, families across Hajong listened for footsteps that might never come, or footsteps that might change everything. Because under Yeonsangun, being chosen was not honor. It was disappearance. The summons rarely came with explanation. A messenger arrived at the gate, carrying a royal order sealed in ink and authority. A daughter was required, a young woman selected to enter the palace. No refusal allowed, no appeal accepted. Official language described it as service to the crown. But everyone understood what it meant. Once a woman crossed the palace threshold, she did not belong to herself anymore. Some returned, some did not, and those who came back were never the same. Yeonsangun had not begun his reign as a monster, eager to prove himself worthy of his father's legacy. But beneath that image lay something fragile and dangerous, a wound formed in childhood. His mother, Queen Yoon, had been removed from power, exiled, and ultimately forced to die. He was a child when it happened, too young to understand the political calculations behind the decision, old enough to feel abandonment. For years, the truth remained hidden from him. When he finally learned what had happened, that court officials and royal women had participated in the downfall of his mother, something inside him shifted. Grief became anger. Anger became suspicion. Suspicion became obsession. And the palace became a place where women carried the weight of his revenge. He punished those directly involved with brutal efficiency. Royal concubines connected to his father's court were executed. Senior court officials who had supported the decision faced violent retribution. But punishment did not end there. It spread outward. Women in the palace were no longer simply attendants or members of royal households. They became symbols, reminders of betrayal, instruments of control, and reflections of the king's unresolved rage. Yeonsangun ordered that young women from across the kingdom be sent to the palace as offerings of loyalty. Local officials complied quickly. Refusal risked punishment. Compliance meant sacrificing daughters to uncertainty. Families prepared their daughters in silence. Some cried privately. Others convinced themselves that royal service might bring security or wealth. But beneath every preparation lay fear. Because once chosen, a woman's future disappeared into the walls of the palace. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with caution. Servants avoided eye contact. Court ladies measured every word. No one knew which action might trigger the king's anger. The women learned quickly. Survival meant invisibility. Do not speak too loudly. Do not draw attention. Do not remind the king of anything connected to betrayal. And above all, never forget that being present was not privilege. It was proximity to danger. Rumors circulated quietly. Some women were favored temporarily, given gifts or status that elevated their families. Others vanished without explanation. The absence of information created a constant state of dread. Uncertainty was the real weapon. Each night, palace corridors filled with quiet footsteps. Attendants guided selected women through hidden routes. The rest waited in their rooms, listening, wondering whether their turn would come next. Time stopped meaning anything. Days blended together. Identity dissolved into routine. Names were replaced by titles or roles assigned by palace hierarchy. Personal histories became irrelevant. They were alive, but they were no longer allowed to exist as themselves. Officials watched their daughters closely, balancing pride and terror. Mothers warned children never to attract attention from power. Beauty became both blessing and threat. Fear moved faster than any decree. And as Yeonsangun's reign continued, the palace transformed into something more than a royal residence. It became a machine, a place where silence replaced law, where women became instruments of power, and where survival demanded the erasure of identity. This was not chaos. It was design. Inside the palace, time moved differently. Outside, seasons changed. Markets opened. Children grew older. Inside, days repeated with suffocating precision. The women who entered Yeonsangun's palace quickly learned that survival did not mean freedom. It meant adjustment. No one told them how long they would stay. No one explained when they would be allowed to leave. And slowly, the realization settled in. They might never leave at all. The palace hierarchy reshaped identity from the moment a woman arrived. Personal names faded, replaced by roles assigned through rank and function. A daughter became an attendant. An attendant became an ornament. An ornament became a shadow moving through corridors where silence mattered more than breath. The first lesson was invisibility. Do not walk too quickly. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not stand out unless commanded. Every gesture carried risk. Yeonsangun's court was unpredictable. One day, he could reward a woman with silk, jewels, or privileges for her family. The next day, he could dismiss or punish someone for a perceived insult no one else understood. The women adapted by becoming cautious observers. They learned the rhythm of the king's mood. They watched his eyes, listened to his tone, sensed shifts before words were spoken. Survival depended on anticipation. Many of the women had been taken from noble families. Their presence in the palace served as a reminder that no lineage could protect itself from royal authority. Even daughters of powerful officials lived under constant uncertainty. Some began writing letters they would never send, confessions, prayers, fragments of memory hidden between folded fabrics. These secret writings were attempts to preserve identity in a place designed to dissolve it. Others stopped remembering deliberately. It hurt less to forget. Outside the palace walls, rumors spread. People whispered that the women lived in luxury, that they wore silk every day, that they tasted rare foods and enjoyed protection unavailable to ordinary citizens. The truth was more complicated. Yes, there were moments of beauty, music drifting through halls, lantern light reflecting on polished floors, gardens blooming under careful attention. But beauty in the palace did not belong to the women. It belonged to the king. Everything existed for him. Even joy was conditional. Relationships between the women grew fragile. Friendship was dangerous because closeness created vulnerability. If one woman fell out of favor, those near her might be questioned or punished. Distance became self-defense. Loneliness filled the gaps. Some women attempted quiet resistance, small acts of defiance invisible to outsiders, refusing to smile, speaking softly in dialect when no guards were nearby, holding on to memories of family through whispered prayers at night. These acts mattered. They reminded them that identity still existed somewhere beneath the roles imposed upon them. But the longer they stayed, the harder it became to maintain that separation. Years passed without clear boundaries. Youth faded into routine. Dreams of returning home became abstract, almost unreal. When occasional releases happened, when a woman was allowed to leave, she returned to a world that no longer knew how to receive her. Marriage prospects vanished. Society viewed palace women with uncertainty. Some saw them as privileged. Others saw them as marked. Either way, they no longer fit within normal life. Many chose to remain silent about their experiences. Silence protected them from judgment, but it also erased their stories. Within the palace, new women arrived constantly. The cycle continued: selection, adjustment, disappearance, replacement. Older residents watched newcomers with quiet understanding, knowing the stages they would soon pass through: shock, fear, adaptation, numbness. The palace itself seemed to absorb emotion, turning individuals into parts of a larger mechanism. And Yeonsangun watched from the center of it all, surrounded by people, yet isolated by power. His grief and anger shaped the environment without needing constant violence. The women carried the consequences simply by existing near him. They were alive. But their lives belonged to someone else. And the longer they remained, the harder it became to remember who they had been before the summons. Power rarely begins as madness. It grows slowly, feeding on wounds that never healed. Yeonsangun's reign did not descend into terror overnight. The transformation came after a single revelation: the truth about his mother's death. For years, he had lived with a version of history carefully constructed by court officials, a narrative that protected political stability while hiding cruelty. Then the truth surfaced. His mother, Queen Yoon, had not simply disappeared. She had been removed, disgraced, and forced to die through decisions made by people he now saw every day: ministers who bowed before him, royal women who maintained the rituals of court elders who spoke of duty and loyalty. Grief turned inward first, then outward. The palace felt different almost immediately. Conversations shortened. Officials avoided lingering too long in the king's presence. Servants moved more carefully, sensing a shift they could not name. Yeonsangun began searching for blame, not through formal trials or laws, but through personal judgment. He summoned records, interrogated witnesses, demanded details others hoped had been buried forever. The more he learned, the more betrayal seemed to surround him, and betrayal needed punishment. The first targets were those directly connected to the events surrounding his mother. 2 royal concubines associated with his father's court became symbols of everything he believed had been taken from him. Their executions were not simply acts of vengeance. They were declarations. No one was safe from the king's memory. After that moment, the palace changed permanently. Women became more than attendants or companions. In Yeonsangun's mind, they represented both loss and control, reminders of his mother's suffering and tools through which he could reshape the court. He did not trust ministers. He did not trust elders. But he believed he could control the environment around him by controlling who entered it. Summoning women to the palace became part of that control. Each selection reinforced his authority. Each arrival reminded the court that loyalty could be measured through sacrifice. Families who had once held influence watched their daughters walk into uncertainty, powerless to intervene. The system blurred personal grief with political strategy. To outsiders, it appeared indulgent. Chronicles later described excess, entertainment, and obsession with pleasure. But beneath those descriptions lay something more complex. Yeonsangun was rewriting the world around him. If his mother had been destroyed by court factions and palace women, then the palace itself would become an arena where he dictated every role. No woman would hold independent power. No alliance could form beyond his reach. Control replaced trust, and control demanded constant reinforcement. The women felt this change without needing explanation. They sensed that their presence was tied to something larger than themselves, an invisible conflict between past and present, between a wounded child and an absolute ruler. Some nights, the king appeared restless rather than cruel. He moved through gatherings, distracted, listening to music without hearing it, watching dancers without reaction. Other nights, he shifted abruptly into anger, interpreting minor gestures as signs of betrayal. The unpredictability deepened fear. No one knew which version of the king they would encounter. Officials adjusted their behavior accordingly. They avoided discussions that referenced past events. They praised loyalty excessively. They offered gifts and entertainment designed to distract or soothe. But distraction never lasted. The purges, known later as the Mu and Gapya literati purges, expanded beyond political rivals. Scholars, officials, and anyone connected to past decisions faced interrogation or death. Violence rippled outward, and the palace women lived at the center of its psychological storm. They were witnesses, they were symbols, and sometimes they were collateral. Within this atmosphere, identity faded faster. Women learned that their survival depended not only on obedience, but on emotional neutrality. Showing too much personality could attract attention. Showing too little could be interpreted as disrespect. Balance became impossible. Some tried to understand the king's pain, imagining the child who lost his mother. Others refused to humanize him, focusing only on the danger he represented. Both approaches failed to bring safety, because the system no longer relied on logic. It relied on obsession. As years passed, the palace transformed into a reflection of Yeonsangun's internal world, beautiful yet tense, structured yet unstable. The women moved through it like shadows, adapting to moods they could not control, living within a story shaped by someone else's trauma. And outside the walls, Joseon watched. Fear spread quietly across the kingdom, carried by rumors of summons and disappearances, by stories of scholars executed and language restricted. People lowered their voices when speaking about the king. Mothers warned daughters to avoid attention. The palace had become more than a residence. It had become a mirror of unresolved grief turned into power. And everyone inside it understood one truth: the king was not seeking peace. He was seeking control over a past he could never change. Power built on fear does not collapse loudly. It cracks quietly first. By the 12th year of Yeonsangun's reign, Joseon no longer resembled the kingdom he inherited. The court, that once prided itself on Confucian order, had become a place where silence replaced debate. Scholars disappeared. Officials bowed deeper, spoke less, and watched one another carefully. Outside the palace walls, something even more dangerous was happening. People were laughing, not openly, not in crowds, but quietly behind closed doors, in markets, in private homes. Satirical notes written in Hangul began to circulate, anonymous messages mocking the king, criticizing his excesses, questioning his judgment. Hangul had once been a script associated with commoners and women, a language of accessibility rather than authority. Now, it became a tool of resistance. When Yeonsangun discovered this, his reaction revealed how fragile his power had become. He punished anyone suspected of spreading mockery. But repression did not restore control. It deepened resentment. The palace, once designed to isolate the king from dissent, began to isolate him from reality itself. Reports reaching him were filtered, softened, or exaggerated, depending on the survival strategies of his ministers. The more he tightened control, the less accurate his understanding of the world became. And, within the palace, the women sensed the shift. The atmosphere changed from tension to inevitability. Servants whispered more frequently. Guards exchanged glances. Messages passed between trusted officials under the cover of routine duties. Something was coming. Not another purge. Not another command. Something final. The women reacted differently. Some felt fear. A change in power meant uncertainty. Protection tied to the king could vanish overnight. Others felt cautious hope. Perhaps the system that trapped them might weaken. But most felt nothing. Years inside the palace had taught them not to expect rescue. The conspiracy formed slowly among high-ranking officials who believed the kingdom itself was at risk. Led by figures such as Park Won-jung and supported by powerful allies, they prepared a coup designed not to destroy the monarchy, but to save it. They would remove the king and replace him with his half-brother, the future king, Jeongjang. The night of the coup arrived without warning. Torches moved through palace's corridors like silent fire. Guards, loyal to the conspirators, secured gates before alarms could spread. Officials entered chambers with carefully controlled urgency, their faces tense but determined. For the women, the night felt unreal. Doors opened suddenly. Orders were given quickly. Servants were told to remain in place. Some women hid instinctively, fearing punishment. Others watched from shadows, sensing history turning but unsure how it would affect them. Yeonsangun himself reportedly struggled to understand what was happening. The power that had once felt absolute dissolved within hours. Titles disappeared. Authority shifted. The man who controlled every movement inside the palace was suddenly controlled by others. He was not executed. He was demoted, stripped of royal status, and exiled to Ganghwa Island. He left the palace not as a king, but as a fallen prince, without temple name, without the honors given to most rulers. The palace breathed again. But freedom did not arrive as people expected. The system he built did not vanish overnight. Records were incomplete. Many women had no clear status, no families willing or able to receive them, no identity outside the roles assigned during his reign. Some were released quietly, returning to communities that no longer knew how to accept them. Society viewed palace women with complicated suspicion. Were they victims, survivors, or participants in a system people wanted to forget? Others remained in service under the new king, their lives continuing with only subtle changes. Survival meant adaptation again. History rarely records their names. It records the coup, the politics, the dates, but not the individual stories of the women who lived through the palace of fear. And perhaps that silence was the final cruelty, because Yeonsangun's fall did not erase what happened. It did not restore lost years or return stolen identities. It simply closed one chapter and began another, leaving those who survived to carry memories no official chronicle could fully capture. In the end, the palace returned to order. Rituals resumed. Scholars returned. Hangul slowly re-merged. But beneath the restored structure lingered a quiet understanding. Power without restraint transforms people into instruments. And even after the tyrant is gone, the shadows he created remain. The women had lived, but for many of them, existence itself had been taken away long before the king fell.